my pleasure to introduce, I'll just get my notes in order, Heiko Scheppers, who's going to talk to us about one of the buildings that was identified earlier. Heiko's a principal for sustainable buildings with Arup, and he combines his skills as both an engineer and an architect, and I can vouch for those skills because he was sitting beside me when that sort of jet engine type sort of noise was emerging, and I had one sort of fairly lame attempt to stop it, and people were saying it'll equalise. I said to Heiko, it'll equalise, and he said no it won't, so I went and opened the door. So he's a very good consulting engineer if you need him. Since joining Arup in 1997, he's been involved in multidisciplinary design of buildings with a focus on the integration of passive thermal strategies, natural daylight and building systems. He currently is the leader of the Sustainable Technologies Group, which specialises in sustainable building. He's been involved in multiple award-winning sustainable building designs, including the RAIA ESD Awards and the New South Wales Sulman Award for Public Architecture. He's been involved as a technical expert on all Green Building Council rating tools and is on the Leadership Council. His international experience includes working in Hong Kong, England, Holland, America and Australia. Welcome, Heiko Scheppers.
Thank you. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the journey that we took for 39 Hunter Street, a heritage building in Sydney. That was designed together with Jackson Teese Architects, and the structural engineers were Hyder. So I'm really just going to talk you through actually the envisaging process for that particular building, what the client really wanted from their commercial imperatives and the values that they wanted to achieve out of the building, and then how we tried to respond to those issues in the course of design. Essentially, our brief right at the start of the job from a very enlightened client who had already developed one existing building to quite a high standard with a 5-star Green Star outcome, is that we were to achieve as a bare minimum 5-star ABGR at the time, which is now Neighbours, and 5-star Green Star rating for this particular heritage building, but also to achieve A-grade status via the PCA, and that's about service quality in terms of what tenants want, to increase the natural light in the space, to maintain flexibility, to protect the heritage value of this particular building, and to do best practice really in terms of occupational health. And that included equity of access, which was a little bit complicated at first for wheelchairs and the like. And finally, it's a speculative building. Okay, so they didn't have a tenant in there, so they had no way of knowing how much value they could subscribe out of the building at the end because they had no tenants, so they had to kind of do it under a speculative budget. The building is in that little red box there on Hunter Street in Sydney. It was first erected in 1916, but it had been refurbished in 1960 quite significantly, and then again some more work in the 1990s. It's 8 stories high, so fairly short, about 1 basement, 6,000 square metres net level. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the context and then what happened to the building in time, and then what we did to it after all of that. So, I mean, as a heritage building, one thing that you find is they often have changed over time, and all sorts of different things have actually kind of happened to them. That was Hunter Street in the 1870s, and our building is in here, which we'll come back to. That's the 39 Hunter Street. It was a banking chamber for Perpetual, and it was actually the tallest building in Sydney very briefly for a while. It was built out of steel frame construction with concrete floors with a heritage facade, but you'll notice quite quickly around the corner from the front facade, it's a fairly conventional kind of brick construction that you see there. That was the original. That was the original banking chamber at the base of the building. Very high space, very high columns, very dramatic, as a banking chamber, I guess, would be to signify what the building did. And that was the floors above there. And I might just pause on this point about heritage buildings. That building is well designed for natural ventilation. It's actually to do natural ventilation, you often have to control the thermal loads coming into the building in the first place, which is something that was kind of forgotten in the 1970s when we built air-conditioned buildings and just use air conditioning to keep them cool. So there's actually inherently in most heritage buildings, the fabric is quite energy efficient. It tends to be the complications of sealing the building potentially when you do air conditioning that causes some problems. That floor plate is fantastic from a natural ventilation point of view. The distance to the facade from any one of those spots is less than 5 metres. And as a sustainability consultant working today, if I were to advise a client to design a sustainable, naturally ventilated building with those kind of parameters, they would laugh at me, really. Commercially, you build much bigger floor plates, but as a result, you can't naturally ventilate them so easily. So heritage buildings are actually very good fabric or form to work from a sustainability point of view. All right, it's been built in. The other major feature was the high floor to ceiling. Also helps a lot in terms of creating a comfortable working environment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about then the changes that have happened to it in terms of context. So the image on your right there is Hunter Street now. Can anybody actually see the building, 39 Hunter Street? Anybody hazard a guess where it might be? It's, I don't know, can you see this guy? It's just right in there, that's it. That was the tallest building in Sydney for a while. So you can see it's completely surrounded by other multi-storey buildings now. That's another shot of it in its context in Sydney, quite overshadowed. In terms of the existing heritage building, the facade hadn't changed much and actually had been restored recently to some degree. The key heritage aspects were actually the entry details. You see some lighting details. There's a lift in there that has quite a lot of heritage value. A lot of the marble has quite a lot of heritage value in terms of the entry sequence. You'll notice there that you can't put a wheelchair through that particular space. That was one of the challenges. There's a series of stairs that go up to about the 3rd or 4th floor that are covered in marble that were also of high heritage value in the space. That was the building as we saw it when we first went for a walk around. And you'll notice now all of a sudden the ceilings aren't so high anymore. A very conventional kind of office space, very, very cluttered and hard to deal with. Those are the light wells that actually have been partially filled in. So previously we had much narrower floor plates, which I'll show you another image of later on. And all of the light wells, there's hardly any light getting down them because of the buildings that surrounded it. That's an image of the banking chamber and some of the nicer cornice moulding and details that are completely hidden. And all the mechanical systems, all the lighting systems, all the wiring that had been put into the building subsequently and disguised by the ceiling below. All right, so what did we do? So I guess after that kind of site visit, we had a very nice process in this particular design, a fairly enlightened client. And the first thing that happened is that they organised basically a charrette where we had the engineers, the architects, the client, everyone in a room together and started talking about, well, partially about what the value is of the property, what the client needed to see in terms of how to get tenants into the space and what the tenant might want to see. And what the architect wanted to see in terms of maintaining the feel and the character of the building, and what we wanted to see from an engineering point of view, and how to condition the building, how to get daylight into the building, how to make it energy efficient. And this is actually a sketch from that first session. We were standing around on the ground with big pens and the like, talking about ideas of how to look at the space and how to make it contiguous and useful in operation to a tenant, but at the same time able to be subdivided at a useful scale. So explaining the diagram a little bit is the previous plan, but instead of having these light wells through the edges here, we filled them in and put a large atrium right through the middle of the building. And I'll come on to the reasons for that. And we have lift banks in the side here and a nice U-shaped contiguous space for tenants. Okay, so the image on the left was the original floor plate. The image on the right was the floor plate when we walked through the building, and you'll notice that those light wells had been substantially filled in at that point. This is the little sketch on the left there. That was the first sketch of the space. That was like formalised into the red pen sketch that you see on the right with the central atrium.